We are live. Hello, Victoria. Welcome back.
Hi, Jonno. Thank you.
Awesome. So today you're back to talk to us about shame, and we're going to challenge some distorted thinking. But so in preparation for this, I was going through, some Brené Brown videos, as one does. But something she doesn't talk about is like why we feel shame. So what if it's a use? All the emotions and feelings and everything, they're there for a reason. Why do we feel shame?
Yeah, so there's a little bit of a confusion around shame. And actually, it's useful to think of it in that there are two different types of shame. So there's like a healthy shame, which is really much the same as guilt. So it's the idea that I've done something wrong, I feel really bad about it, and I don't want to do it again. And that's obviously very helpful, because if we didn't feel that, we'd be running around like psychopaths and the world would be in chaos. So it's really important that we feel shame in that way. So it's more like guilt. But then there is a toxic kind of shame, which is when we internalize guilt and shame and it gets wrapped up in our identity. So the idea is that I will believe that I am not good enough, that I am not worthy of love, that I'm not worthy of belonging. And that's when shame is really destructive and really, really unhelpful. And that's why we talk about it being something that is an unhelpful emotion.
Okay, and how does it work when people feel, so it's this like cycle is weird, because what we do is we feel ashamed and then we do more of the stuff that we feel ashamed about doing. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, so really we'll feel ashamed, and all of these thoughts will come from that. Like, okay, I'm not good enough, I'm going to fail, I can never succeed. And so when all of those thoughts are happening in your head, you're going to want to run and hide from them. So you're either going to want to keep it a secret, you're going to get defensive, you might even attack somebody else to kind of protect that part of you. And so you're going to do things that are actually quite destructive. So an example of that is like binge eating. So you go on a binge, all the shame stuff comes running and rushing out. And instead of doing something that's helpful, you keep it a secret, you hold it in, it feels much worse. And then you'll continue to eat to try and manage that feeling or get rid of that feeling.
Or to like dampen the pain of the shame, you would do stuff that keeps you feeling ashamed. Why do we do that? Like, what is because there must be some logical reason for us to do that. To be completely counterintuitive. I'm not tuning anyone else, by the way. I do that too. I like eat a Snickers and then I feel bad about it. I'm like, well, maybe I'll just have another one. What is that? That's ridiculous.
I think it's an avoidance of a very intensely painful experience. And to actually talk about it and get vulnerable is also incredibly uncomfortable and painful. So it's like, I guess it's a human thing of choosing what's easier in the moment, even though the effects of it are going to spiral and it's actually going to be worse long term. It's kind of like an instant gratification. At least I can soothe it for a second. I think that's what it is.
Well, and so you said, like, instead of doing something helpful. So what is helpful when you feel so desperately ashamed?
Well, okay, so this is something that people have to learn to develop. It's called shame resilience, and it's actually Brené Brown that speaks about it.
Oh, Brené.
Yeah, she's great. And the idea is that you actually start to own your shame. So you start to recognize when it appears and you understand the thoughts that come from shame for you. So it's kind of like everybody has a shame script. So a script that pops out of your head when you're in that kind of situation. And for you to notice your distorted thinking and how you're speaking to yourself, and for you to actually stop that process from taking over. So stop the shame from clouding how you think and then how you behave. And part of doing that is reaching out for help, speaking about it, sharing your experience with people. That's a very important part of understanding your shame and recognizing it.
And how is that helpful?
What?
So example. So let me. Well, no. So I mean, like asking for help. I mean, I think many people would be devastated at the thought of asking for help. But let's just say, like, for instance, at Real Meal, we get a lot of women who are like very, very overweight. And it's always like, I love it when they arrive, because it's like they have asked for help. But even then, they don't want to actually tell us what their weight is or what else is going on. And then even like a couple of weeks in, they'll have like a breach of kind of, like fall off the bus or something, and then they're too ashamed to talk about it. So what, like, I can understand why they wouldn't want to tell anyone. What is the benefit of actually talking about it for the outcome, not necessarily for how they might feel, but like, how would that help you actually lose more weight or get a result?
Well, so if you talk about it, shame can't really exist anymore, because shame happens in your own head, basically. It might start from an experience of someone else shaming you or whatever the case was, but we carry on reinforcing the shame in our own head. So it's kind of like a little shame committee of you speaking to like 6 versions of yourself. And all those versions are saying, yes, you really are stupid for doing what you did. And you should feel ashamed. And so that process goes on in your head. And so speaking about it, suddenly you're getting different experiences of that. People are saying, I totally get what you're going through. And I totally relate to you. And I did that the other day. So then that shame can't grow like it was growing in your own head. And so you can behave differently. So yes, it does start to feel different, but very importantly, you can start making better decisions, because that feeling of shame, it clouds judgment and decision making. So I think that's how it works.
What do you say to someone who has been shamed by others, about their weight? Like, for instance, in a marriage, when you're getting shamed by your significant other for your weight or something that you've done, like, how do you isolate like someone else's shaming you from your own like shaming yourself?
Well, I think you would have to help that person maybe get a bit angry about feeling shamed, not taking it on themselves, not making it part of who they are. I deserve this feeling, understanding where it's coming from, not taking responsibility for it, separating out what's somebody else's mistake, problem, whatever, and what's actually yours and what makes you you and gives you self-worth. So it would be a bit of a process, I think.
Yeah, okay. No, I haven't seen too much of a curveball, but you did say anger, and I've heard you mention anger in some of the workshops you run on Fridays at Real Meal, and saying anger is also not necessarily the best emotion all the time, but it also serves a purpose. So it's good to get angry about stuff, which is something that I really can't even connect with. I'm like, surely you wouldn't want to be angry, but why would that be helpful?
Well, I think it's a very similar kind of process to shame. The moment you are expressing it and understanding it, it loses its power. So you might be angry and holding it in, and then suddenly when you're driving in the road and you have road rage, it all comes, out like that, or you shout at somebody you shouldn't really be shouting at. And so I think owning it, understanding it, it stops those really destructive patterns from playing out over and over again. And as humans, we love repeating patterns. But the moment we understand something, we can actually look into it and take a moment to step back, and we can change what it looks like. So I think that's,
So what about stuff where you've done something? So for instance, like there are a few, I don't know if I call them like deal breakers or game changers, maybe more of a deal breaker, but like, some people do things that they feel ashamed of that are actually really hard to come back from. For instance, like killing someone, and maybe more closer to home, not my home, but just, we probably know people who this has happened to, but like had an affair or, well, I would say an affair is a big one. What do you do to say to someone like that, where talking about it is going to take the shame away, but like that could also end the game for them?
So I think in situations like that, it's really useful to understand the difference between shame and guilt. So shame being like, I am a mistake, I am a failure, whereas guilt is like, I made a mistake. I failed at something. And when you can understand that your behavior or something you did was wrong, it means that you have power to do something to change it. So somebody who's done something really serious, I think they would have to kind of feel their guilt. It would be an appropriate response to feel upset and really sad or whatever else they feel about it. And they would slowly have to learn to keep on separating out what is them as a person and what is behavior, and working on not letting that shame always play out in their relationships, if that makes sense.
I mean, it makes sense. Like, theoretically, that's great. You know, I can feel bad about doing the thing, but I don't have to feel bad about who I am. How do you tell the difference between those two feelings?
Well, I think it would be a lot of talking about it and getting perspective. I think it's really hard to do it by yourself. So it would be getting some perspective on what's really going on. But yeah, it is hard to distinguish those things sometimes. So definitely it would be a process. Sure.
And then you spoke about reality checking in the workshop. So for those of you who don't know, Victoria is a clinical psychologist, and if you want to contact her, you can find her details in the post. But she also runs workshops with us at Real Meal. We do an eating psychology workshop every Friday, and I missed the workshop on Friday. But you were speaking about the difference between shame and guilt, and then distorted thinking. So after we feel this shame and guilt, there's this thing that happens called distorted thinking. Can you tell us about it?
Yeah, so shame and guilt will basically activate all sorts of distorted thoughts that we've developed over time. So a distorted thought is like a very automatic way of looking at the world, and it's usually a very negative way or a very inaccurate way of seeing the world. And it comes,
Can you give me like an example?
Yeah, so say I learn as a kid that I can't trust anybody. Maybe my parents are really unpredictable. Nobody's really on my side. I have to protect myself. So I learned that I can't trust anyone. And that helped me maybe as a kid, but now growing up in new situations and circumstances, not trusting anyone can be really harmful, and it can be really, really lonely. So it no longer works in that situation. But when I'm in a stress response or I'm feeling shame, those kind of thoughts will automatically pop up. And so reality checking is about like taking a step back from your thinking and noticing, okay, this is part of my distorted thinking that's playing out here. It's happening right now, and I need to challenge that, which is usually doing the opposite of what that thing is telling you. So another distorted thought that's very common is called mind reading. And it's basically the idea that like someone is thinking of me very negatively. And when that plays out all the time, you can imagine that it makes it really hard to reach out for help or have relationships. So someone would need to recognize that it's happening and then challenge it by speaking to that person or asking that person what they really think or whatever the case is.
So geez, I can't even think of an example of that. So you mean someone would be sitting there thinking about someone else, like a colleague or a loved one, and in their mind they're making up all this stuff about what that person's thinking. Like, yes, she hates me, she thinks I'm an asshole, oh my God, like we're definitely going to break up or whatever.
Yes.
And that's just this party for one happening over here.
Exactly. And then can lead to something destructive. Like if I sit here and I think all of those things about you, say right now, that this is going terribly and this is the worst thing I've ever done and everybody's going to hate me, my next move is going to be to shut down the computer and go and do something to get rid of that emotion or something self-destructive. Okay. So it's important that I can say, right, the self-talk is happening and I need to be kinder to myself. I need to be gentler with myself. I need to understand that this is distorted. It's not necessarily true of what's going on.
That's like a limiting belief, isn't it? Is that the same thing?
It's really, really similar. Yeah, I think it is. Yeah.
Is that related to a neural pathway? Like, is that I mean, I know that everything's sort of in a way a neural pathway, but that just gets burnt in. Like with the one that you said earlier was actually like something that I talk about quite often. I think like when you're a child and bad stuff happens, like people can't be trusted, and then you go through life thinking that's a limiting belief. Is that so? Distorted thoughts and a limiting beliefs like the same thing?
Yeah, I think they are. Yeah,
okay.
I think they are, and they are a whole. There are a whole bunch of, you can actually find the names to the different ones, and that's quite useful because then you can actually say, this is what I do. I do mind reading, I do filtering, I do whatever all the different ones are, and it actually empowers you to see what's going on and to make changes to it.
I mean, as a total aside, did you end up self-diagnosing yourself with like everything when you were studying?
We actually had to do that when we were studying. We had to do like a personality test and see what came up and why. And so, yeah, kind of.
Because, I mean, it's very easy to sort of see all these things, which are like conditions when you mention them. But like everyone has like a little bit of a binge from time to time. Everyone has like a little bit of mind reading. Like after I say something, I'm always like, I wonder how that landed, you know, or like, or can I really trust this person? So like, where do you draw the line between what is normal and what is like what like pathological or like to worry about?
Yeah, I think it's whenever that thought leads to some kind of unhealthy behavior that is no longer helpful. That's where, yes, you're right, we all do little bits and pieces of that. But if I'm unable to have a conversation with you because I'm convinced you don't like me, and I turn down any opportunity to do so, that's then having a significant effect on my functioning. And that's when it's a problem.
Okay. And are there like clear indicators of like, is there like, what I'm saying is there a checklist someone could say and think like, because they might think that what they do is normal, but actually it's not, or they might think what they do is totally not normal, and then they wouldn't have no way of measuring like how normal it is. And I know normal is a very relative term.
Yeah. I mean, there's very clear ways to figure out if your thinking's distorted. The best thing to do is talk to someone about it, and it helps like to get it reflected back at you and see what you're actually saying. And a really nice technique is
like I'm insane.
A really nice technique is to imagine if you would speak to yourself the same way that you would speak to a friend, and actually write down your thinking. And imagine, would you say that if your friend came to you and said, I've eaten half a cake for breakfast and I just feel absolutely shocking and I'm a failure, are you going to be like, yep, you're definitely a failure. In fact, you should go eat the other half of the cake and just get it over with. And that's how we speak to ourselves. And we've got to start noticing that we're doing that. So that's a really nice like starter off technique to recognizing some of the distortions in thinking.
Well, and you raised a good point there, because I think one of the things that I work with quite often, but also I think everyone battles with, is like how you get from a point where you really do genuinely believe you are worthless, and so you know the comment I get is like, how am I supposed to speak kindly to myself if I am genuinely a piece of shit or whatever? You know, like what how do you justify being nice, telling that person like, okay, I know that you don't think that you are worth anything, but like you know, how do you get them to be kind to themselves? How is that how does that mechanism change or work?
So I think in that case, because you can't just tell someone, you know, you shouldn't feel worthless, feel worthwhile.
Don't feel.
And it would be around giving that person a space to express what they are feeling and to normalize it and to relate to it, and to empathize with it, because empathy is a big part of it. And slowly that person will start to recognize that, oh, it is okay if I talk about this. And it is all right that I do feel this way. Maybe I don't have to hide. And I think that's like the most amazing part about the hero group and even the workshops is people get to recognize that they're not alone in something. And they may not be like sitting there knowing that they're feeling shame, but there's just little moments where that they can kind of say, okay, I'm not alone, and maybe I can be a little bit braver next time with something that I do, or I can try a little something next time. So I think it sort of happens in a progression for people that really don't feel like they're worthwhile or have no self-worth.
Yeah. And you said something, you said empathy is the key, but then how is empathy the key? Or you said it's really important. How is it really important?
Well, it's just that knowing you're not alone, knowing there's nothing wrong with you, that other people are going through it with you. And the moment we have empathy, again, that idea of shame can't survive with that, because shame is all about in your own head and by yourself. Empathy, suddenly it's another person expressing similar things to you, and to some extent understanding where you're coming from.
Sure. No, it's a very important topic. I hope people are listening, and I hope if you're getting value from this, that you're sharing it out there. Victoria, that's amazing. What is coming up? What is the workshop you're doing next?
Next week is actually on boundaries. Yeah. Which is interesting, because you might not think that has anything to do with eating and food and all of that, but it's got a lot to do with it. Like how we treat ourselves and how we treat other people. It's all part of boundaries. So it's quite an interesting one.
You mean like, so how we treat it, so it's all part of boundaries, but it relates to weight loss in which context?
That we've got to learn to put boundaries down with other people, and our own boundaries in our own lives, because often we can't do that, and that just is mirrored in our relationship with food. That we can't put down the appropriate boundaries we need in terms of eating.
Yeah, like, oh, I'm never eating cake ever again, and then you go to your mate's house and they're like, here, have some cake, and you're like, no, I really don't want cake, and they're like, well, I made the cake for you, and you're like, okay, well, fine, I'll eat the cake, no boundaries. Gold. I cannot wait. So if you want to get hold of Victoria, email her, address is in the post. If you want to join the workshops, they are every Friday, and there's a link to sign up to the online course in there too. Victoria, you flipping legend. We will see you in a couple of weeks' time for a recap. We're going to talk about boundaries then, and maybe some other stuff. Okay.
Okay.
Very excited. Thank you so much. Bye.